Hi everyone, my name is Chia Kim Chuan. Number metric is 271381.
Hello everyone, my name is Chen Qingyang. My metric number is 2653350.
A very good afternoon to Doctor and all my beloved friends. My name is Siu Hui, metric number 274022.
My name is Jin Ang Chai Jing, matrix number 274026.
My name is Ho Susan, metric number 274030.
The learning objective for chapter 6 is we should able to identify the audit objective applicable to the property, plants, and equipment. Second, discuss the consideration relevant to determine the audit strategy for property, plants, and equipment. Lastly, decide a further audit procedure for property, plants, and equipment. So now I will present about the introduction related to chapter 6. So we found that majority of the entity has a material amount in their financial statement is representing by the property, plants, and equipment. Second, during the engagement, the auditor can just only focus on the PPE that the client purchased on the financial year. This is because the previous year, the PPE has been audited and tested. For the new engagement, the auditors must verifying the amount that built out the PPE account opening balance. This is because since the first one I has been mentioned that the material amount in the financial statement of the client is representing by the PPE. So for new engagement, the auditors must ensure that the amount is correctly reported and be trusted by the users of the financial statement. Next is the size of the entity will also affect the audit approve. For example, if the entity really purchased the PPE during the entire year, so it will cost the typically cost effective for the auditor to follow the substantive test. Besides, the auditor also based on the substantive test to conduct the analytical procedure and direct test to the balance account of the PPE. Lastly, for the large entity, they usually use some computer-based system to process their property, plants, and equity process, and also maintain their subsidiary, and also generate some required document related to the PPE or report. The report has been generated from the computer-based system. We can review the PPE transaction, which recording by the physical plants department.
Now I will explain the definition of PPE and audit objective and control. Tangible assets that are used for sales in an ordinary course of business are excluded from beginning recognized as PPE. In accordance with MFRS 116, PPE are tangible assets that are held for use in the production or supply of goods or service for render to others or for administrative purpose. These assets are expected to be used during more than one period. In acquiring any assets, they have some costs incurred. According to the MFRS 116, cost of acquiring PPE shall including the purchase price, any cost directly attributed to bringing the assets to the location and condition necessary for it to be capable of operating, and the initial estimate the cost of dismantling and removing the assets and restoring the site on which it is located. The cost of an item of PPE would be recognized as an asset if and only if it is probable that future economic benefits associated with the item will fall to the entity and the cost of the item could be measured reliably. Resulting from the reason of PPE normally constitute a significant portion of the total assets in an entity. So, audit of PPE assumes considerable importance. Features of PPE that may have a significant impact on the related audit procedures are PPE. In nature, it is high-value item. The amount normally carry over from year to year because they are normally counted for once, unlike inventory that are more liquid compared to PPE. Audit objective can classify to three types, which is transaction, balance, presentation, and disclosure. For transaction objective, first is occurrence. Recorded additions or disposals represent PPE occurred or sold during the period under audit. Second, completeness is all addition or disposal that occur during the period has been recorded. Third is accuracy. Addition or disposal are currently journalized and posted. Next is cut-off. Addition and disposal of PPE before the period end are recorded in the current period, and those after the period end are included in the next accounting period. Last is classification. Additions or disposal of PPE are recorded in the correct account. So, to safeguard all the assets, auditors need to make sure that all the assets are recorded in a proper way. If all the assets are recorded accurately, auditor can easily identify which asset accounts are exposed to risks that threaten the company. Auditor will identify the risks they need to be aware when auditing PPE. For example, risks that may occur when purchased assets at an inflated price, wrong valuation used to calculate fair value of PPE, and issue occurs in capitalization of asset expenditure. It is very important to conduct proper audit procedures in order to obtain adequate audit evidence to make a right conclusion on PPE account for the audit PPE. For balance objective, first is existence. Recorded PPE assets represent productive assets that are in use at the end of the reporting period. Second is the right and obligation. The entity has a right to all recorded PPE at the end of the reporting period. Next is completeness. Non-current asset balance include all applicable assets used in operation at the end of the reporting period. Last is valuation and allocations. PPE are stated at cost or valuation less accumulated depreciation. So, to ensure that all the PPE are recorded correctly over their useful life, auditor must make sure that the cost of PPE has been recognized only when the cost has been measured reliably. The management team need to verify the number of years and ensure the respective assets account will bring economic benefit to the company in the year mentioned. To avoid any mistake in calculating the useful life, the auditor should review the useful life and residual value of the asset at least annually and evaluate whether the client's estimate is reasonable, such as compare the industry standard and professional judgment is necessary. This is important so that the estimated useful life of the asset used will be more accurate. Next is presentation and disclosure objective. First is occurrence and right and obligations. Disclose PPE transactions has been occurred and pertain to the entity. Third is classification and understandability. The details of additions and disposals of PPE support their classification and disclosure in the financial statement. Last is accuracy and valuation. PPE transactions are disclosed accurately and the appropriate amounts. Audit of PPE is to make sure that the subsequent measurement and disposal of assets is in accordance with the standard. Example like subsequent measurement in calculating carrying amount for the asset, depreciation or any impairment included. This means that the auditor should identify which PPE require impairment and depreciation and determine the method used to compute the measurements. Then the auditor also needs to examine the depreciation change and impairment change to avoid mistakes in computing the calculations. If using inappropriate depreciation method to calculate the asset, the book value and the true value of the asset will be different. So auditor need to check the client's depreciation method to evaluate whether it is comply with the applicable accounting standards. Lastly, to ensure that all the additional of the asset are properly authorized, auditors should ensure that every acquisition of PPE will be supported by supporting documents, not only for the additions of PPE need to record properly, but also recognize the disposal of PPE during the period under audit. Example of documents including title deed, invoice, document to show the ownership of the asset. An ownership document is particularly important to prove that the ownership has been transferred and the asset is now owned by the company. Now, that's all from me. I will pass to my friend to continue.
So next, I will explain the developing the audit plan. So during developing the audit plan, some of the factors should be included in the audit plan, which is materiality and inherent risk. So the first factor, materiality of PPE. What is materiality? Materiality is the auditor's determination of materiality is a matter of professional judgment and is affected by the auditor perception of the financial information need of users of the financial statement. So second factor is the inherent risk. We need to assessing inherent risk. Inherent risk is the risk that is unable to be protected or detected by a company's internal control. So the third one is plant register. Plant register is a record of information about each item of property, plant, and equipment employed by a firm. So we go to the materiality of PPE. So how to measure the materiality of PPE? Before we measure the materiality of PPE, a benchmark is required to help auditor measure the materiality of PPE and set the materiality of financial statement as a whole. The benchmark is usually based on auditors' professional judgment, which must consider qualitative factors that affect the materiality of individual misstatements. For example, common base included net profit, total revenue, total asset, and equity. After that, auditors should apply performance materiality. In other words, tolerance misstatement. It is usually to be a percentage of overall materiality. So, this is the example of measure the materiality of PPE. So, given an example of client's entity, auditor use net assets of the company as the benchmark for materiality. After considering the qualitative factor, 2% of net asset used for overall materiality. For the performance materiality, it will be set at 75% of overall materiality, which is actually a low risk level. So we can see in the table net asset is 50 million and the overall materiality is 2%, which is 1 million, and the performance materiality is 750,000. So after that, the relationship between the materiality and audit risk is inversely. The higher the audit risk, the lower the materiality threshold the auditor set. So and next, the extent of audit procedure will be increased if the audit risk is high. For example, selecting a more effective audit procedure or performing audit procedure closer to the balance debt. So we move to the assessing the inherent risk. So during assessing the inherent risk, auditors should attempt an understanding of the client and its environment business to consider inherent risk and control risk pertaining to the audit engagement. Inherent risk can be categorized into two levels, which is entity level, for example, management integrity, nature of an entity's business, and management experience and competence. And the second category is the account balance and class of transaction level. For example, complexity, degree of judgment involved in determining account balance, and susceptibility to misstatement of or loss. So several factors that cause the inherent risk. The first one is complete accounting issue like lease accounting, self-constructed asset and capitalized interest. The second is difficult to audit transaction, such as transaction involving donated asset. The third one is misstatement detected in prior audit. So the next is plant register. In auditing, assets need to be regularly checking unfound in order to avoid damage or obsolete and provides evidence of their existence, and so auditor will not need to physically inspect the asset at the end of the reporting period. Validity of the PPE register need to establish through the following action. The first action is to check the casting in the PPE register. The second action is checking unfound addition and disposal for the period in the general ledger against the PPE register and vice versa. The third action is the agree total cost of each major category of PPE in the general ledger with that PPE register. So this is the example, the plant register document. So inside the document, we can see that it has the client names, site address, project, and that when we buy the PPE, and the equipment description, serious number, and others.
Now I will present about the differences between the non-current asset and current asset during the auditing. So I will discuss about the three aspects. First is the value and number of transactions. Second, the effect on the net income. Lastly will be the audit procedure. So right now we look at the first aspect, value and number of transactions. So for PPE, it has a high value but has a few transactions in a year. So it has a little change annually due to the impairment and depreciation. For example, for PPE is land, building, and the machinery. On the other hand, for the current asset, it has a low value and complete turnover several times in the year. And for example, like account receivable, inventory, and cash. Next, for the effect on net income. For PPE, there would not be effect on the net income, although there has a error in recording for the acquisition PPE and also the amount in the year entered cut-off period. But for the current asset, any error occurs during the cut-off period, such as sales and purchase, it will affect the pre-tax income for the year. Lastly, for the audit procedure. For PPE, the auditor should plan and perform the audit procedure in the auditing PPE and identify the accession. Second, determine the ownership, right, and obligation of PPE. Third, inspect all the document sources like example lease agreement, invoice, and title deed by third party, and fraud, review depreciation policy, and expected useful life. Next, for the current asset, inventory include 3 audit procedures. First, physical inventory counting. It includes before, during, and after for counting the inventory. Second, the auditor may use the statistical sampling to count the inventory. Third, perform an analytical review procedure which can provide additional and substantive evidence. Next, for the cash, it includes 4 audit procedures. First, to ensure that the cash asset on the financial position is with a correct amount. Second, request a bank confirmation and undertaking the test of bank reconciliation. Third, the auditor tests the client bank reconciliation to substantial bank's balance. And fourth, compare the amount on the reconciliation with the total in the bank statement, general ledger, cash received, and the cash payment record.
The management teams of the company are responsible for the development of an internal control structure to prevent inherent risks. The creation of the internal control system depends on the objective of audition and control. The financial system assumption is typically the first thing to be identified along with the corresponding purpose of the audit. The auditor also needs to review the internal control related to the account while auditing property, plant, and equipment. Firstly, the occurrence test is to ensure that the acquisition of the reported PPE was made, which additions reflect the accurate asset and the disposal represent the assets sold in the year. Next, the test of completeness is to ensure that any transactions related to PPE that has been reported in the financial statements. For instance, the purchase and sales of PPE, the purchase and the sales related payments or benefit. Classification is the necessary to ensure that the data and the information reported in the account of PPE is the current account and its property disclosed. It's also very important to ensure that any amount of PPE is reported currently in the financial statement. The cut-off test is to ensure that transactions relating to PPE are reported and disclosed within the current timeframe. If the PPE is obtained or disposed of after the date, it will not be included in the current period and will be reported in the next period. To achieve those objectives set earlier, all of those tasks should be included in the PPE audit. The first practice is the invasion of duties, which relates to the need to delegate various individuals to different tasks or duties. This definition prevents the same individual from having authority to perform more than one conflicting duty. This situation helps to mitigate the probability of error or fraud. Second, alien transactions or operation, including the acquisition, transfer, or disposal of PPE, must be approved. Proper authorization helps to ensure that all transactions comply with the standards and procedures defined by the organization. The auditor may determine whether the organization has complied with the current authorization process. Invalid transactions or events can be avoided by getting proper authorization. Next, the maintenance of documents and the record is equally necessary. The auditor shall check whether the company maintains adequate and appropriate documentation and records relating to the PPE. Those controls include the restrictions on the entry and access to designated area of company premises, offices, or factories, and restrictions on the use of certain equipment. Independent controls mean that a person who does not participate in the company's internal control system can verify the efficiency of internal controls. Independent materials are also part of the control activities. This task is generally carried out by the internal and external auditor of the organization to check and ensure the reliability, performance, and effectiveness of the internal control system.
Next, substantive procedure for PPE plants and equipment. A substantive procedure is a process or task that creates conclusive evidence regarding audit objective. To be qualifying as a substantive procedure, enough documentation must be collected so that another competent auditor could conduct the same procedure on the same document and make the same conclusion. In the audit procedure for PPE, we need to test various audit assertions, including completeness, system, rights and obligation, valuation, and presentation and disclosure. This is so that we can make sure PPE balance reported in the financial statement actually exists and reflect their actual economic value. Additionally, we need to evaluate whether all PPE items are included and if they really belong to the client. Completeness. For the PPE audit, we test completeness assertion to ensure that all PPE transactions that occur during the year have been recorded. Lack of completeness will result in the understatement of PPE. Tests of completeness in PPE audit include to consult and compare the PPE register with the general ledger, select a sample of PPE item that physically exists, and trace the selected item to the PPE register. We need to obtain proper explanation if there are any differences between the PPE register and the general ledger. Assistant. When we perform the PPE audit, we test the assistant assertion to ensure that the PPE balance shown on the balance sheet really exists at the reporting date. Tests of assistance on PPE audit include select a sample of items in PPE register and perform physical inspection on the selected item. When performing the physical inspection of PPE, we need to make sure not only that the selected item really exists, but they also need to be in working condition. Rights and obligations. Rights and obligation assertion tests whether the client has the right and ownership of all PPE shown on the financial statement as at the reporting date. Test of rights and obligation in the PPE audit include select a sample of PPE item in the register and examine the title documents or title deeds of the selected item to ensure that they belong to the client. Valuation. In the audit of PPE, we test the valuation assertion to ensure that the PPE balance are mathematically correct and proper valuation method has been made. The valuation assertion usually relate to the depreciation of PPE. Hence, we usually perform the test of PPE depreciation in this section. Test of depreciation in the audit of PPE. First, review the client depreciation method to evaluate whether it is in accordance with the applicable accounting standard. Second, examine the useful life of PPE to evaluate whether the client's estimate is reasonable. For example, by comparing with industry standard. Rational judgment is required and is very important here. Third, perform the calculation on the depreciation of PPE and compare the result of the calculation to the client's figures. Presentation and disclosure. In this session, the concern is to ensure all disclosure have been made in compliance with accounting policy and procedure. Types of presentation and disclosure in the PPE audit include determine the PPE asset and related expenses, gain, and losses are properly identified and classified in the financial statement. Second, determine the appropriateness of disclosure pertaining to cost, value, depreciation method, and useful life of major classes of asset, the pledging of asset as collateral, and term of lease contract. Third, inspecting accounting policy including depreciation method and rates. Last, inspect all the detail of movement of cost and implemented depreciation during the year. That's all from me.
So in this part, I will explain the three tests, which is confirming the increase and decrease of balance, physical examination, and the confirming of repairs and maintenance balance. So we go first the confirming the increase and decrease of balance. So in the confirming the increase and decrease of balance, the auditor has to quantify the amount and discuss with the company on the appropriate action to be taken, or probably recommends that the unsubstantiated balance be written off if the existence of the asset concerned are doubtful. Several procedures that auditors can apply to verify the possible understatement and overstatement balance of fixed assets is the first one is test basic select some equipment items and trace to fixed asset register. The second is investigate item physically found but not entered in fixed asset register. The third one is checking any capital expenditure has been charged to revenue. The fourth is compare fixed asset register with general ledger. Next. So physical examination. So under physical examination, auditor need to understand the client's company environments to reduce misstatement in PPE balance when conduct physical examination in PPE. Auditor perform audit in PPE to state the existent amount from plant register by comparing the physical asset with underlying record. If any amount that do not present accurately, auditors need to make inquiry procedure to management to provide the updated plant register and verify the assets. If the auditor has discovered there have some criteria does not meet, auditor need to highlight it and report it to their audit supervisor for further discussion with the management. The next part is the depreciation examination. Depreciation examination is the one thing under physical examination. So depreciation is the decrease in the value of the assets due to wear and tear, obsolescence, lapse of time. While auditing depreciation, the auditor must determine the following aspect. The first is whether adequate depreciation has been provided during the current year. The second is whether the depreciation is calculated by appropriate method. The third one is whether the appropriate method has been selected after the consideration of the useful life and salvage value. The fourth is whether the depreciation method is consistent over the time. The fifth one is whether any changes in the method has been properly disclosed in the financial year. The next one is whether accumulated depreciation is in respect of discussed or disposal assets have been adjusted in the accumulated depreciation amount. And the next is whether depreciation has been provided on revalue asset. And the last one is whether the depreciation has been properly disclosed in the financial statement. So the next one is confirming of repay and maintenance balance. Repay and maintenance expenses related to PPE incur when the client's entity aims to bring the asset condition back to an initial state or improve the asset to keep the asset operating at its present condition. The expenditure amount is recognized as a part of asset and depreciation over the asset remaining useful life if the repay that have extended the asset's useful life. The auditor's principal objective is to analyze the repairs and maintenance expenses account so that items that should be capitalized can be detected. Thank you.
So as conclusion, in verifying PPE, auditor verified change in the record balance and inspect addition. Transactions involved in PPE are infrequent and material, are usually subject to a special treatment, and auditor really test control over non-current asset transaction. They're preferring to adopt a predominantly substantive approach, and PPE are be likely to be overstated than understated.